Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Beatrice, and welcome to another episode of Voices of ASEAN. Today, we continue our series, The Diplomat, where we showcase ambassadors from all over ASEAN with His Excellency Ong Keng Yong, the former Secretary General of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN. His Excellency started his diplomatic career as the Charge d'Affaires at the Singapore Embassy in Riyadh and has since represented Singapore in many countries, including Malaysia, the US, Nepal, and India. Currently, he is the non-resident High Commissioner to Pakistan and non-resident ambassador to Iran, and is the one of only 3 ambassadors at large with Singapore's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. His Excellency Ong is also the Executive Deputy Chairman of the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, or RSIS, at the Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, where he also serves as Director of the Institute of Defense and Strategic Studies. Speaking on his experience in the diplomatic service and Singapore's relations with ASEAN and the rest of Southeast Asia, joining us live from Singapore here is His Excellency Ong Keng Yong. Hello, Ambassador. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
Ambassador, let's plunge straight into it. Tell us about the highlights of your career as the Secretary General of ASEAN and representing Singapore as an ambassador.
Well, when I was in ASEAN, we settled 2 big things. We formalized the ASEAN community.
Okay.
And as you all know, ASEAN community, we have 3 pillars for political and security cooperation, economic integration, and also for socio-cultural development and cooperation.
Okay.
So that is under the ASEAN community. Then the second most important thing is that we finish our drafting and promulgation of the ASEAN Charter.
Okay.
The 2 big C's, as I call them, community and charter, they were settled during the period 2003 to 2008.
Okay.
So those are the 2 things that we have since been working on, and ASEAN member states are still going through different aspects of the community building, as well as holding on to the principles included, promulgated in the ASEAN Charter. This is the little booklet. It's the ASEAN Charter.
What is the core of it? What's the core essence of the ASEAN Charter, Mr. Ong?
There are 3 things in the ASEAN Charter. One is that we are all independent member states.
Okay.
Therefore, we have our own national identity, national interests, and from there we have our national position. However, we agreed that for ASEAN, we will find common ground and proceed as ASEAN in various sectors and on different issues. The second thing that we did was to start out our existence as ASEAN organization, as an ASEAN organization. So you hear often about the principle of non-intervention in domestic affairs or internal affairs.
Yes.
The third thing that we did was to spell out the role of the Secretary General and the various sectors under the ASEAN community building. So we have, for the first time, a clearer understanding of what the ASEAN Secretariat is about. How is it different from the ASEAN Secretary General? In the old days, the ASEAN Secretary General was titled or designated Secretary General of the ASEAN Secretariat. So people think that the Secretary General was just a chief clerk. But actually, the Secretary General of ASEAN is a specific appointment. He has his own protocol ranking. He is regarded as someone with ministerial status, and he is always sitting in ministerial meetings with other ministers of ASEAN. And he would serve the ASEAN leaders at the Leadership Summit as the Secretary General and reporting into the leaders, and also taking their instruction to send it off to the various ASEAN sectors and ASEAN ministerial committees.
So like the Prime Minister of ASEAN, sort of like.
No, we don't call ourselves that. We
But
are just one of the chief executive working for this regional body.
Okay.
And it was a bonus for the leaders to accord the Secretary General of ASEAN what we call the protocol of a ministerial rank. So on our own, we as Secretary General will be able to visit other regions, other countries to promote our ASEAN agenda, talk to other countries outside of ASEAN on the basis of development plan, cooperation activities, so on and so forth. So we have the mandate. We means the ASEAN Secretary General has the mandate to conduct some of this business, but decision and policy matter always go back to the ministers, in particular the foreign ministers of all the ASEAN member states.
I see.
They are the basic caretaker of the ASEAN organization. Yeah, so we listen to the ASEAN foreign ministers in their deliberation, and then we make proposal for them to consider, and it goes up to the ASEAN leaders if a decision is required from them.
So when you said, Ambassador, that there are common grounds that all the ASEAN member states could work together, because ASEAN is quite different from how the EU works, right? The EU is far much more consolidated in what they do. So ASEAN is still, you have your autonomy and you have your own currencies, but then you're saying that there's some common ground with which member states work together and that benefits them. Could you tell the audience what are some of these common grounds?
Well, for example, we work together as 10 member states in the organization promoting what we call free trade agreements.
Okay.
So before we sit down and negotiate with the Republic of China or the Japanese or Koreans or Australian, New Zealanders and Indians, we discuss among ourselves, the 10 countries, what would be our basic position for, say, the ASEAN-Korea Free Trade Agreement. And then we will go into negotiation with the Republic of Korea and come to a formal conclusion. We sign the document, and that ASEAN Republic of Korea Free Trade Agreement will govern our trade relations, investment flows with the Koreans.
I see.
And all of us in the ASEAN member states will follow what is provided in the said agreement.
I see. So that means as 10 countries, you have more lobbying leverage when you want to do.
Yeah, ultimately having 10 countries together will give us the greater weight and, as you say, more leverage. Yeah, and most recently, in fact, last year, 2021, a very significant event took place in ASEAN, which has not been very well covered in international media or even the regional media. And that is the coming into force of the RCEP, Regional Economic Cooperation Partnership.
Okay.
RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. That is what it stands for. RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. It consists of the 10 ASEAN countries together with China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. So it is a very significant package. And mind you, it is more significant because in the case of China, Japan, and Korea, they do not have their own bilateral free trade agreement.
Oh, okay.
So what they do is now they have this trilateral agreement inside what we call the RCEP. Yeah. So it is easier for China, Japan, and Korea to meet under the RCEP than if they are required to meet on their own. They have been talking among themselves, the three countries, to do a free trade agreement, but not much progress has been achieved since there are so many specific bilateral problems between, say, China and Korea or between Japan and Korea and so on and so forth. But under the RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, we all sit together ASEAN 10 members and China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. So it is actually a very remarkable achievement on the part of ASEAN, bringing together these partners to form this partnership. Basically, we designed it to integrate the economy so that we have more trade and investment flow among us, between us. Yeah.
So the RCEP is a brainchild of ASEAN?
Yes, yes.
Oh, I
It's
see.
not
So it's
from
driven
ASEAN.
by
It has
ASEAN.
nothing to do with other people. Well, they talk about what do you call free trade agreement for the Asia Pacific or free trade agreement for the Indo-Pacific. No, no, no. What started, how this thing got started was the aim of ASEAN to bring together the respective ASEAN free trade agreement with China.
I see.
Respective free trade agreement that we did with Japan and Korea, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. If you look at the history of such free trade negotiation, it took place over a period of maybe 10 years. So at different time when we conclude, say, ASEAN-China agreement, we reach a certain understanding about something. But 5 years later, we reached an agreement with Australia for the ASEAN-Australia free trade agreement. Then a few years later, we did something with ASEAN South Korea, Republic of Korea. So you imagine 5 different sets of free trade agreement. ASEAN with China, separately ASEAN with Japan, another one ASEAN with Republic of Korea, another one ASEAN Australia, and ASEAN New Zealand.
I have a question. Is there a reason why India is not in there? Because it's huge. It's a huge trading partner.
They decided to stay out. We have an ASEAN-India free trade agreement. But they decided to stay out because they cannot agree with China on what benefits China and India will exchange under the RCEP. So even though they participated in the negotiation right from the beginning until the end, they were there, India. But the final 1 minute, as we call it, they decided they will not sign.
Oh,
due to
that's
whatever reason they have. So, you know, we in ASEAN are very disappointed, but well, that is India's decision. So bear in mind, the way in which we organize this RCEP is to merge all the important elements of our respective free trade agreement with the 5 big guys, namely China, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand. Then we synchronize our language. We have more common definitions of certain terminology and certain benefits that we share with one another under this kind of agreement. Yeah, and so after we finished the negotiation, came January this year, this RCEP is already in force. So it is actually a very huge free trade agreement. Yeah, one of the largest the world have ever seen. But due to other distractions, like for example, COVID-19 pandemic, we don't get a lot of headline coverage.
Yeah, it's true.
And the fact is, however, on the ground things are moving, and business and companies are starting to tap into the provision of the RCEP. And what is interesting in the RCEP is that it is actually a very contemporary agreement, because when we negotiated the various activities and elements inside the partnership, digital economy was flourishing. So we have introduced many useful principles and operational framework for things like e-commerce and how do we tap into the so-called digital economy. Of course, these provisions with regard to the digital dimension are still very broad, and you need to zero in on specific elements between all these signatories, among the signatories. But we have already incorporated many of the consideration and operating principles inside the RCEP. So if we study this RCEP in depth and through all the various chapters, it is actually a very, what I call current, very applicable agreement across the whole of ASEAN plus China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. We hope India will come in, but so far they skipped the signing ceremony and they say they cannot sign because they have bilateral issues with the Chinese authorities.
Could you share with the audience what was their issue?
Basically, India wanted to have more access to the Chinese market. Okay. And the Chinese side have certain rules and regulations which hamper the export of India into China. So, but these are the kind of issue that China have with Japan, China have with Korea, and China have with Australia and some of our ASEAN economy like Indonesia. But in the course of the negotiation for the RCEP, all these difficulties were looked at and appropriate compromise were made. And finally, the relevant chapters in the partnership agreement, the RCEP, were drafted in a manner which addressed all the concerns. Yeah. So in the case of China and India, both sides were not ready to settle on some of the wishes the other side have. Yeah. So therefore, they have delayed coming together. So as of today, the RCEP has basically 10 ASEAN member states, yeah, and the 5 East Asian and Pacific partners, namely China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand.
I see. So it's 15 countries.
Yes.
So from RCEP, I would like to talk about the highlights. Is there anything that, any exciting moments that you like to share with us in your career as Secretary General of ASEAN? It's not often that we get to meet the Secretary General of ASEAN. So I'm sure the audience would like to know something exciting or a highlight or an achievement that you want to share with the audience.
Well, mainly the job involved traveling from place to place, yeah, talking to different officials in the 10 ASEAN countries. And ASEAN has 10 what we call dialogue partners. All the major economy of the world, they happen to be our dialogue partners. USA, Canada, EU, and all the big East Asian economies, India, Australia, New Zealand. These are all our dialogue partners. And then over the last 50 over years, we have also have what we call development partners, Switzerland, Norway. We have a smaller economy associating themselves with us. We call them sectorial partners. So altogether, we have a big grouping of members of the global community. So in the job as ASEAN Secretary General, we will have to deal with all these what we call external relations. Yeah. And if there are anything specific, we bring it back to the respective ministerial body in ASEAN, which will agree or disagree, and then we enter into the next stage of engagement. So the job involves a lot of traveling. Yeah. These days, the traveling part might be curtailed because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But also another development is that when we first started, we agreed to hold meetings across the ASEAN region. The idea is to let different ASEAN policymakers and officials visit one another and see the geography of ASEAN, the characteristics of different ASEAN countries. Now we have been together more than 55 years, so we are saying, okay, we have our meeting at the headquarters. The headquarters is the ASEAN Secretariat in Jakarta. So I think in the coming years, we will still travel more frequently though to Jakarta and less frequently to the other fancy ASEAN cultural center or big city. So,
last question. Sorry, go ahead.
So traveling and visiting the region is a fascinating aspect of the Secretary General's job. But actually, we travel to all these places in order to serve as the resource person. Remember the term resource person. We are not a policy maker. We don't make decisions for ASEAN. ASEAN, you mentioned just now about the EU. ASEAN is a intergovernmental organization. Yeah. EU is really a separate kind of international body, where nationalism is minimized, and everybody has to work within the authority given to the European Commission, so on. ASEAN remained 10 individual government, and we agreed on certain things as ASEAN, but we still have our own respective national policy, national position. So this is a complication in contemporary times. Like today, people ask, why is there no common ASEAN position on this crisis in Myanmar or the crisis in Ukraine or the crisis wherever? It is possible in the case of Myanmar. We have a ASEAN leaders meeting last April, and we have a common understanding. We call it the 5-point consensus. But in the case of Ukraine, the latest crisis that hit the international community, we don't have a consistent ASEAN line across all the 10 countries. Each of us have our own respective statement. Of course, there is a generic ASEAN paragraph in the foreign ministers' recent meeting, but those are what we call general and somewhat anodyne, because at that time when the foreign minister met, the crisis was not yet a full-blown situation. So since then, the ASEAN member states have each issued their own statement, and in the case of Singapore, we have made a very strong commitment to the sanctions imposed by the developed countries, and we have also promised to do certain other things. In contrast, people in the media are not happy with what they see to be more generic, generalized statements from other member states of ASEAN. So we in ASEAN cannot tell each other what to say, how to say, unless we all come together and agree to that. So for example, South China Sea tension, we have all these overlapping claims, competing claims in the South China Sea area. There are specific ASEAN positions because all 10 of us agreed on what to say about X, Y, Z regarding the South China Sea. So it is a unique regional body in the sense that we have what we call the intergovernmental structure. It is no longer suppression of the respective state position or national interest as you see in the European Union.
So how is a Secretary General then chosen? Are they elected? By whom? And how are they chosen from? From where? What pool are they chosen from?
The existing protocol is that we have a Secretary General that can serve 5 years in one go, and we rotate the position according to the English alphabetical order of the name of the ASEAN member states.
Okay.
So when I was Secretary General of ASEAN, Singapore is with alphabet S. Then after my turn, it was someone from Thailand. After Thailand, it was someone from Vietnam. After Vietnam, we start again from B. Brunei currently has someone holding the job as ASEAN Secretary General. After him, we'll go to Cambodia because next alphabet in line is Cambodia. Then after Cambodia, we will have Laos. Sorry, we'll have Indonesia first. So that's how it goes. 5 years. It is not so straightforward in the sense that we know who is going to be the next Secretary General. Someone from Singapore, someone from Thailand, someone from Vietnam, or whatever. But we do not know who is the actual person to be nominated by the country concerned.
So the country will choose who's going to be the
Yes, yes.
So if
will nominate somebody, I was nominated by the Singapore government, and then the name was submitted to the ASEAN leaders, and they have the power to say, I don't like this Ong Keng Yong, and you give me another name. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's why we still say that we are elected by the ASEAN leaders.
I see.
And in the case of Thailand, during my time, after I served my 5 years, the next Secretary General was former Foreign Minister of Thailand, the late Dr. Surin Pitsuwan. Right? He was a former Foreign Minister of Thailand.
I see.
The Thai government nominated him. But the process in Thailand also involved looking at the civil society and other interested academics and whatnot. So they have their own internal selection process. And finally, the government of Thailand said, okay, we select Surin Pitsuwan. And then his name was presented to the leaders. And if there is no objection,
then it's just selected. I see. Yeah. Okay.
You can object. You can object. In the case of Dr. Surin, there was at one stage some objection from Cambodia.
I see.
Yeah, because certain people in Cambodia think that Dr. Surin was not friendly to them. Yeah, but then we go into certain lobbying or explanation, in this case by the Thai authorities. So we as members of the ASEAN Secretariat, we couldn't get involved in this. This was left to the member states. It's the purview of the ministers from the respective member states.
So finally, how did Cambodia think he was friendly to them when they said yes?
Well, finally, the leadership in Thailand and Cambodia talk to each other and in the spirit of brotherly love, we call it brotherly love, nice to one another. So it is a nice story in the sense that it's not a given. The only thing that is given is that we know who is after this current guy. So the current Secretary General is from Brunei. So we know the next chap must be from Cambodia. Who is that? We know. We don't know.
And the Cambodian government will decide who's going to represent.
And then after the decision is made by the Cambodian government, the name will be floated around. And if there is any issue and there is no solution, leaders can actually vote against the guy or the candidate. That will be a big news if it happens. Because so far, this has not happened before. There is always brotherly love. The chit-chat behind the closed doors and then something.
Pat in the back. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Ambassador, with your expertise in foreign affairs, your expertise in public policy and in the region itself, can you share with us the relevance of ASEAN as a regional grouping and as an institution, and how successful it has been in achieving its goals?
Well, the two things that we have to bear in mind is that ASEAN is intergovernmental. Yeah. It is not like the EU or in the other case that we have looked at the African Union. Yeah. They have specific provision in their respective constitution to work together on thorny issues or specific challenges. We are still 10 different guys sitting around the same table. We agreed to sit together at one round table and we try to find a way to overcome any issues that we don't like about each other. Yeah. So in that respect, like for example, in the current Myanmar crisis, when we really got whacked by our friends in the media and civil society, ASEAN seemed to be at a loss as to what to do about the coup d'etat in Myanmar. Yeah? But at the same time, actually, if you look at all the regional and international organizations, almost every one of them work on the basis of some form of consensus in making decisions. Yeah? So it is not very fair to say that ASEAN, as a Southeast Asian regional body, we seem to be weak and unable to make concrete decision going forward. But nevertheless, that's where we are. We continue to try. Yeah. We think that ASEAN as a whole has a negative public image. Yeah. But in some area, as we have just discussed about the regional comprehensive economic partnership, it is reasonably successful. And if you look around the ASEAN region, which is Southeast Asia, there are certain success in certain sector. Yeah. More and more you see the interaction of younger people across our 10 different boundaries, and they are getting more understanding about how do we work together in order to leverage on each other's strength.
Yeah.
This is something ongoing. It will take more years to gel together so that we can be effective in a certain troublesome area. But for now, many people in the developed nations, as well as in the media in ASEAN, in Southeast Asia, think that we are weak. But weakness in this case does not mean that we cannot accomplish anything.
Of course.
Three things that ASEAN can do, which I don't think there is anybody else capable of accomplishing them. First is that we bundle 10 of us in Southeast Asia together. And we have now more than 1,000 meetings from working group, expert to leaders at the summit per year. So we basically scrutinize one another and look at how we dress, how we eat, how we make decisions on X, Y, Z. Where we can agree with one another, we do it together. And when that happened, it has been quite a good ride, so to speak. We have 10 guys from Southeast Asia, 650 million people with a regional economy, number 3 or number 4.
Number 4.
Coming up in a few years' time, we'll be number 4 in the world after US, China, and EU. So the scale is significant, the size of it is significant. But at the same time, we also have to deal with challenges like the geopolitical issues. I mentioned about the Myanmar crisis, when the authorities in Myanmar refuse to play ball. There's actually not much leverage we have. Because we can't say, you don't do it, I'll send in my peacekeeping force and do it. Whatever you don't like, too bad. We don't have that kind of effectiveness. But overall, the most important thing is that 10 of us are together, and we are still talking to Myanmar authorities, even though we have barred them from attending our leaders' summit and for ministerial meeting. The second thing is that as the only regional body in Southeast Asia, the big guys like China, Japan, India, in the region, basically think that it's easier to work with one entity called ASEAN with 10 guys from Southeast Asia. So in that respect, our relations with the big neighbors, big powers in our region, Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific, have been very positive. From time to time, we have trouble, yes, but at the end, we will find some processes and some precedent in the past in ASEAN library where we can take it up and say, hey, last time you agreed to this one, so why can't we continue to do this? So we make some headway. And in that respect, many scholars think that through this kind of interaction with regional powers around us, we have achieved a certain level of stability and peace. Unfortunately, as we have seen in the case of Myanmar, internal upheaval come into the forefront. At the same time, while we are doing this with the regional powers, we are able to reach out to people from the rest of the world. So the United States of America, EU, Russia, Canada, all these people, they find it very convenient to cooperate with one regional body that can have 10 guys coming together and they can do one big meeting instead of traveling to 10 different cities.
Right.
The value of ASEAN to the United States of America, China, number one and number two economy in the world today, is that we can help these countries, these big powers, achieve whatever they wish to do in Southeast Asia, so long as they are peaceful initiative, there are things that will be mutually beneficial. So if they are in a big conflict and expect us to take one side against the other, then it will be difficult.
Yeah. So basically,
and the last thing that we have in ASEAN is that, you always hear about this centrality of ASEAN. Centrality of ASEAN can mean having ASEAN in the center of your agenda, whether you come from India or you come from Russia or Timbuktu. But not just simply say, I happen to like Singapore, so my cooperation with ASEAN will always be focused on Singapore. No, you can't do that.
Okay.
The ASEAN spread. So you have to look at how you coming to cooperate with Southeast Asian nation, how do you spread around? And if possible, we focus on doing something through the ASEAN organization, benefit the regional country. So these are the kind of things that we believe ASEAN serve a particular purpose. And it may be slow moving in some real crisis situation like what we see in Myanmar and now in Ukraine. But overall, it is, like we say in colloquial terms, in interacting among ourselves, ASEAN official will say, better than nothing lah. At least we can come together, even though we are having big political differences, we don't agree with X or Y, we still come together and talk and try to engage those other big powers. But most important, do not allow the big guys to come to Southeast Asia and use it like what they did in the 60s and 70s when we had the Vietnam War, with the collapse of the Cambodian government, so on and so forth. So this is something that we try to elaborate to people who are happy to listen to our discussion.
In unity, you have strength.
Yes, that's true. And many people who are more ambitious say that we could have greater strength if we come together as a unified group earlier than later. But you must always remember there are three egos. One is you and I, we have our own personal ego. Do we want to be part of ASEAN the way it's been designed? Then on top of that, we have the national ego. As Singapore, should we do this or that? Or as Malaysia, should we participate in this or that? Then as a regional organization called ASEAN, we also have our ego. Vis-a-vis other regional organizations elsewhere in the world, we wish to be treated with decorum, and if there is an interest to work with ASEAN, like for example this RCEP I talked about, okay, we try to negotiate and settle a deal which will benefit all of us. So at the end of the day, my job as a Secretary General is basically as a resource person for the ASEAN ministers and ASEAN leaders, is to keep reporting on all these developments and how we can work together as a grouping to score some good goals. So we're in a football match.
Because there's so much potential in the region.
Yes. This is a thing that keep us going, Beatrice. In the last 3 years or so now, even the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, the ASEAN economy as a whole is still generally positive. And there are big pockets of rather good growth. I mentioned just now about the digital economy. What RCEP has touched on in the digital sector is only a very small percentage of the vast size of the digital economy. Now we have moved on to the next level, which is to say we will try to do digital economy partnership agreement. How do we write on that? And the other very positive thing which all the investors from all the big economies of the world have seen in Southeast Asia is that we are, comparatively speaking, very IT savvy, very internet connected, our population is now moving closer to 670 million people as a region. And 60% of these big population, of these numbers, are under 35 years old. And as you can see, anybody under 35 years old, they will have knowledge about using the computer, they will have a handphone, and nowadays with handphone, you can do everything under the sun. Therefore, the digital economy, the size of the IT sector, and all things automated, they have grown considerably. And recently, we see a lot more investors coming our way, and the size of the middle class in Southeast Asia has also grown significantly because of this kind of what they call bubbling developments in the respective ASEAN countries.
Just to interrupt you, there's a question that's coming in. I like to take this question. It's from Jamie Stevenson. He's saying, Your Excellency, may I ask if you have any thoughts regarding the impacts to ASEAN resulting from this terrible situation in Ukraine, and in particular the sanctions against Russia, whereby the removal of the major Russian banks from SWIFT and so on, because a number of nations have significant relations with Russia, and these nations may be adversely affected from an economic perspective.
Yeah, I think the important thing is to stay united in our response to the what I call the disregard for international rules and international law. The basic point here is that a big guy go into the home of a small guy and say, I want you to rearrange your kitchen and your furniture in the living room. That's something acceptable to normal human relations. So if it is not, then how can it be translated to a level of state-to-state relations? Okay? And on top of that, if you don't change your furniture the way I want it in your living room, I will blow up your whatever things you have in your living room.
Sounds like the Iraq War.
Yeah, in fact, sounds like any war.
Every invasion, Iraq,
any fighting
Syria,
between two countries, it is always the ego of one country against the ego of other countries. But okay, if there are no rules and there are no principles, difficult to arrange for a ceasefire or try to rejig every problem. But now we are all members of the UN. Yeah, we are members of other regional and sub-regional organizations. And then we all tell each other at all these nice conferences, brotherly love is important, we follow the rules, don't punch each other in the face for some simple thing. And suddenly you have this situation where one guy decided to go into another country and blah, blah, blah. So in terms of the sanctions,
we didn't exactly
we in
sanction
Singapore have
US.
issued a rather strong statement, or in the view of my wife, very strong statement. But I think we have to look at Southeast Asia in a different manner that I have described just now, in the last 20 minutes or so. We are 10 countries. Beatrice, if you look at our borders of the 10 countries, there is no one country in our region that can say they have problem-free border demarcation or problem-free boundary between one and another. So how? If we don't maintain the principles of interstate relations, the principle of sovereignty, very soon people will just walk all over each other. So I think ASEAN understand this. We remember we used to handle this problem in the late 70s and throughout the 80s when we have the problem in Cambodia. But now going forward, what do we do? Okay, some of our countries want to be a bit more.
I think the question is like, why do we get involved? You know, like the question is, we are ASEAN, and that's a fight in Ukraine and Russia. But we are removing the Russian banks from SWIFT, and I think the question from Jamie is, it affects businesses in this country. So do we really need to get involved? and sanction it by actually
I mean,
removing
I don't know where Jamie come from, where the question come from, but I am from Singapore, which is a city-state. Beatrice, you look at the geography of Southeast Asia and the history of Southeast Asian countries. Small states can easily disappear. You look at the history and the geography. In Southeast Asia, you just look at it. How many small states are there?
That's right. It's true.
You can count on one hand. And if these small states, what they call, not doing the thing that the big neighbor like, where we go? The principle must be established that you don't like each other, but you cannot walk over each other. So I think there is a significant here. We are not used to the idea that, now we apply sanction. Therefore, Russian business with other people, we cannot use the bank. Sorry, if you are Ukrainian, I don't think you will say this. You will say, this guy come over and just destroy my country, and then now what? I got no firepower. I got nothing else to rely on except this particular device that you call SWIFT rules and transaction. So if the rest of the world feel that on principle, on morality, and on other consideration, this is the way to go, I think all of us should take a look at this and see how do we measure up. If you are a big country, you will not be worrying about this. But if you are a small country like Singapore, I think many of us Singaporeans will think about it. Just as we are talking, you are from Malaysia and I'm in Singapore. I think if you look at the social media, there are so many exchanges in the last 4 or 5 days to talk about how actually Singapore Island belong to Malaysia. And actually Malaysia and Singapore used to be part of Indonesian Empire. And Philippines, they are still claiming Sabah and so on and so forth. Cambodia claimed that certain part belong to Thailand claimed that certain part of Cambodia belong to Thailand, not part of Cambodia. If you want to go to one particular temple along the border, in fact, you have to go into Thailand in order to reach that temple situated on the Cambodian territory. So these are things that are still there. Therefore, what I personally feel, I don't know about our policy guys and government officials. First thing first, what are the principles that we need to coexist? We cannot solve this kind of problem because no one will ever voluntarily give up any particular interest or piece of land or particular assets to the other guy. So the way to do it is to apply the necessary law, operational rules, and keep our peace and stability.
So we have an unspoken rule among ASEAN member states not to attack each other.
In the charter that I told you, we have one principle that we will not allow our territory or member state to be used for certain hostile action or anything inimical to the interests of fellow ASEAN members. So this is a good exposition of what we as individual ASEAN member state are obliged to do. So, well,
is that handbook easily available in language?
It is on the web. You can just Google for it. Everything is nowadays available on the ASEAN Secretary website.
I see. Okay.
And
I love the color of the book. Is it green or yellow?
It's green.
It's green. It's very bright.
Well, actually, I make this decision to have this little green book with these blue words. Blue means the peace, UN color. And I'm just glad that until now, this was back in 2007. Until now, people still maintain this booklet. I think they have printed it many times already. But the important thing, coming back to the question here, is that I feel that we have to separate the emotional issues, yeah,
I think so too.
the personal consideration from the bigger challenge, which is the future of interstate coexistence. Because if we don't think about this, we are going to be in very deep troubled water. One example that I always use is that today on the internet is borderless, right? If I don't know you and we are talking like that, we think that we are all from maybe the same country or from the same region. But the fact is that we are from different countries, different nationality. And if someone feel that due to a certain aspect of history, there is still a claim against the other guy, and just walking with the tank and the guns, whoa, I don't think there is any more room for the kind of international community and global configuration of countries as we know it today.
But there has been a lot of wars in the last, I think, at least 20 years. But we didn't take, as ASEAN, we didn't take a stance against those countries invading the other countries, but we are taking a stance against Russia. So I think the question here was, does ASEAN get involved?
We are very consistent, Beatrice. The last time we did this was when there was the military occupation in Cambodia. ASEAN country at that time, there were fewer ASEAN countries at that time. 6 of us, sorry. Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, and Brunei. Yeah,
I think yes. Well, within ASEAN, yes, because that's what we get together for. We have to protect the countries within ASEAN so we don't get infiltrated. But I mean, I think the general, for a business community, getting involved in other people's wars can sometimes be detrimental to the way we run our business. Like I think but I mean, I'm going to go past this question, but just like to reiterate what I think, like where I think the question came from is like, do we want to get involved in wars that are very far away and we don't really know the origin or the basis of the war, because there's always two sides to the story. But when we make a stance on one side and then it affects the businesses in ASEAN, and isn't that our primary role to safeguard businesses and for the people in ASEAN?
I think don't agree with you on the part about safeguarding our businesses. What is business? Business is not your personal, private, entrepreneurial domain. You do business because it is profitable for you. You do business because it may be your occupation, your job as a business operator. But business operator need rules and regulation to thrive.
Okay.
In the internet world today, we are still looking at how to provide a good regime for governance of the cyber domain and the digital application. So if you are saying that because we are in business and war will affect business, we don't want war, we don't care about the reason why war started, then I think we are going down a very slippery slope. Because business exists due to the consensus of people for peace, security, and development and progress. If you have a situation where I don't care about a big guy going into a small guy's territory because it's far away, tomorrow it may happen to you. So I think let's reflect on this more carefully. Business is important, yes. Money is important, yes. But business and money can be made again elsewhere. Life once lost, sovereignty once trodden over, come back. I don't believe a good old Russia dominated the whole part of that geography from time immemorial. It was because of civilizational development. There was an empire, and then after some time, empire fall, and all these things. So we have reached a rather civilized state of human coexistence. And now we are saying, because we want business to thrive, we don't care about war in faraway places. Oh, I think something is not quite good in our logical frame. I think we need to think about that. The ASEAN Charter is just a booklet. We can just throw it off and say, I don't care. I need to operate from Singapore in order for me to deal with the problem I don't like in Kalimantan or in Sumatra. You mean that's okay? Because business will be affected, therefore we don't make a stand. No, I don't agree with that. And I think we can debate this for a long, long time.
Yeah, but let's move on. Let's move on to the next question. We want to talk to you about you being your role as executive chairman of the Rajaratnam School of International Studies, or shortly known as RSICs.
RSIS.
RSIS. What did I say? RSIC?
Yeah.
RSIS.
Yeah.
So, how has your hands-on experience in foreign service contributed to your role, Ambassador, as executive chairman of RSIS and as its director of the Institute of Defense and Strategic Studies?
So I wear 3 or 4 hats.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And my wife always asks me how I manage this kind of responsibility. Today I'm talking to you now in my RSIS premises, and I'm responding from the basis of my work here in the S. Rajaratnam School International Study. We do a lot of research. We interact with countries across the world. We have networking with all kinds of other think tanks and universities. We are part of the Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. So we try our best to look at research. What are the issues that help us to get better outcome? For example, I mentioned just now about cyber governance. It is called the Wild Wild West of the 21st century, because there are no rules to govern how you conduct yourself vis-a-vis another party with regard to the use of the internet and whatnot. So we do research and study how other governments have encountered this problem, and deal with it. And we try to spread the good word about this particular proposal, maybe useful, this and that. My diplomatic training helped me to be more gentle about my debate with people from the other side of the issue. And in my role as director of the Institute of Defense and Strategic Studies, we do a lot of research on what you see now in Ukraine. They engage in cyber warfare. They engage in what we call kinetic warfare, using the tanks, using the airplane to attack civilian targets, this and that. So what kind of rules, what kind of preparation we have to make in order to establish a semblance of humane, civilizational coexistence.
So this school is named after S. Rajaratnam. Could you tell our audience who he was?
Well, he was the former foreign minister of Singapore. In fact, our first foreign minister. He was a compatriot of Lee Kuan Yew. People know Lee Kuan Yew better than S. Rajaratnam because as a foreign minister, he covered foreign affairs, political issues in Singapore and elsewhere in our political sphere may not be directly bringing S. Rajaratnam into contact with the readers or your listeners. But he was part of the PAP government, first generation of leaders. He established very good position on foreign policy issues, and he articulated his ideas quite well, and he got a very good.
Did he start the school, Ambassador? Or was it named after him, or did he start?
We named the school after him.
I see.
In 2006, yeah.
I see.
So the reason why we named after S. Rajaratnam, of course, is that in our international studies, in our research on all these issues that we have been talking about, he has always got some input in his writing, in his speeches, and he had basically established a very good set of principles for conduct of diplomacy, especially for a small state like Singapore, existing in a big neighborhood like Southeast Asia or East Asian, Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific region.
I see. So he was a legend in that field, I guess, in his sphere.
Yes. He's a legend, and if you look, you Google his name, you will find that he was at the forefront of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan.
Oh, okay.
1988, yes. And he led the campaign against the Cambodian crisis, and he maintained the seat of DK, Democratic Cambodia, which was a government that was deposed by the civil war in Cambodia. So all these things establish him as a giant among foreign policy thinkers in our region over the past so many decades. When we read his speeches and his other ideas, he was really very foresightful, look forward. And the more important thing, Beatrice, is that he was the strongest advocate of a multiracial and multi-ethnic religious Singapore.
Yes, I think Singapore has done really well with that.
He told us all to adhere to this idea of coexistence, multi-cultural, multi-religious, whatever.
Yes.
Because you know Singapore is just a small city-state with 5 million people, and we come from different religious background, and in fact, various research organizations in the Western world describe Singapore as the most religiously composed society in the international community.
Actually, it is.
Every religion you can find in Singapore.
Yeah. And that's another question I wanted to ask you, because I think you must be very proud to be Singaporean, because anyone looks at Singapore and sees it's really a thriving ecosystem of multiple religions and races, and that's almost fair equity for all. And you've pulled it off, very well.
Well, I must confess that it requires a lot of work. I'm not in government, but when we do our research, we just look at the enormity of the kind of undertaking whoever is in charge has to encounter.
And I think consistency in your leadership is also a key part of it. Would you agree, Ambassador?
Yes, I agree. But I think what is more important to me for the Singapore DNA, so to speak, is number one, we are always looking at the future.
Okay.
Because
yes,
in order for any government to stay in office, you have to give your citizen, your voter, a good hope of what is to come.
Absolutely, right.
So this government is absolutely committed to the future.
Yes.
Today we are talking about carbon tax and what we call renewable energy. Hey, that is 15, 20 years down the road, but we are already doing all these things in order to prepare our future generation for a good living in Singapore. So for us, for me in particular, I believe that the really special ingredient of this Singapore governmental system is constant devotion to what will happen in the future to our country.
It has
and how do we ensure that we survive as a country? So we talk about changing climate. Talk about education. How do we become relevant? And now we have a big problem in Singapore society. We are aging rapidly. We don't have enough young Singaporeans to replace those that pass on. So what do? We look at bringing in foreign workers, foreign talent, as we call them. But to do so means that it will disrupt our society,
That's right.
our construct in this small island city island, small island city state. So we have to start looking at all this. But every step of the way, we have to think of one thing, the four-letter word which I call HOPE, hope. You have to give people hope.
You got me scared there, Ambassador. You got me scared there for a while. When you said four-letter word, I'm like, oh no.
No. Love is also a four-letter word.
Yes, true.
But for political leadership, hope is very important.
Yes, it's true. I agree with you.
If you give people hope, you give people the sense that there is a good future, they will continue to do what you think maybe impossible, but they will do because they want their children, they want the next generation to get something better than what they have gone through.
Yes.
So this is a little wonderful characteristics of S. Rajaratnam. He talks a lot about problems of the Cold War. We talk a lot about the problem of the Cold War, the implication, what the future will be, but he offered certain suggestion and how we organize ourselves. So fortunately, we have Lee Kuan Yew and other cabinet members who come together to look at the other aspect of it. So the economy, the social issues, and I think at the end, you mentioned something about leadership.
Consistency in leadership.
Yeah, consistency. Yeah, I think that is really the important element.
Yeah.
Really, the goal must be to give hope, to achieve the kind of hopeful notion that you have, and then we sit down and say, what do we do to ensure that this hope does not evaporate like air?
I think that's what keeps people together. There's hope for a better tomorrow for all of us. But if there was one singular thing that you, in your own opinion, you would think that that's what has made Singapore such a spectacular success, not just in Southeast Asia, but in the whole world. It's a shining example of a very successful country. If you look back at where it came from to where it is right now, what do you think is that one winning formula that Singapore used that made it such a success?
I believe that you have to gain the trust of the people in your society, in your country. When my generation talked to the older generation, our parents, why did you give support to the Lee Kuan Yew government and develop Singapore to this level? The answer would always be, well, his suggestion or the government's proposal looks sensible, give us a good sense of what we can do.
You can justify it
in
to
the
the
future,
people.
and then they deliver.
Yeah,
so
that's
the important thing, whether you are in business or in academia or whatever, don't overpromise. Don't overpromise and do what you promise to do.
Yeah.
So I believe most of the international polling done in Singapore show that Singaporeans are generally still trustful of the government. The government is trustworthy. It still maintain a high percentage of support for the government based on the confidence that government will deliver what it promised to do.
Yeah.
Of course, in this process, our government leaders tend to become more conscious.
That's good.
Maybe anxious.
They feel pressured.
These days you hear older Singaporean saying all the younger leaders tend to be a bit too, what they call chicken-hearted, But the fact is that they are trying to get into a big shoe, a big bell.
You're right.
a pair of big shoes already.
Yeah.
They're trying to get into a pair of big
Absolutely
shoes.
right. And they have to live up to it.
Ultimately, the important thing is that the citizen here may grumble, or the resident and citizen of here in Singapore will grumble about government policy and that. But at the end of the day, they are prepared to say, okay, if I do this, you give me what you promised to deliver, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it works. So far, the equation still seems positive. You trust me, allow me to do this. These are the goodies you get. If this goodies part become less obvious, then the trust will start to evaporate, and then we will have issues. But so far, based on this trustworthiness, the leaders in the government here build on other ideas. Yeah? The reason why we are successful is because we work together, regardless of race, language, or religion. So why bother to create new divides among our existing population?
Yeah.
It's just an accommodation of one another.
Yeah.
Okay. So this kind of constant messaging is important.
Yes, you're right.
I find that some of my foreign researcher friends in our school tend to say, oh, the government of Singapore tend to overreact and tend to be afraid to lose out on every little small things. I say yes, but then they have a track record to demonstrate that they have to be like that in order to deliver the goods and to retain the trust of the population in Singapore.
Yeah. Very well explained, Ambassador. Excellent explanation. Thank you. And last question. I think this is such an exciting dialogue. We actually went the longest time. I think this is the longest session we've had with any interview, because you were so interesting with all the way you've explained everything. So I have one last question. How do you think a private business entity like Voice of ASEAN, which aims to bring the business community together, make a difference in any way compared to all that's been done?
Well, I think, as I always say, to each their own, but in my encounter at the ASEAN level, and even here in Singapore with my own colleagues and students, I think there are three simple words. One is that you have to be reliable.
Sorry, I didn't get you, Ambassador.
To be reliable, you have to be reliable.
Reliable,
Don't overpromise. Don't say I can do this and then you fail to deliver. Then of course you have to be relevant. Your organization is devoted to getting better public understanding of all these complicated issues. So you need to get the right people to explain in an objective manner. It is almost difficult to say valueless. Every one of us has a value, but try your best to explain the situation in a fairly coherent and non-ideological way. And in that process, people say you are actually, it is very educational to listen to you or work with you. So you have to be relevant. You see many business reports, some of them telling us why companies fail. If you are good in making shoes, suddenly you want to make cosmetic. Does it make sense? Or in other contexts, you overextended. These days, this is very, very likely to be the case because everything is online. So you say, well, I use all this idea to promote my book publishing business. Then the next step, maybe I can make a movie. I can produce musical and do concert, publishing books, and doing all these other things that you may have in mind are two different things. So unless you have a bottomless bucket of money, you indulge in your fancies. Otherwise, stay to the main business. Be reliable to all your partners. Then the last R really is the reach. You have to find your reach. Singapore is a very small market with know. Malaysia is quite a big market.
Yeah.
However, the market is segmented into many different characteristics. So at the end of the day, it is not as big as Singapore. Because if you have a big country with a big population, but multi-segmented, multi-fragmented,
that's true.
In the end is net out.
That's true.
It's not a very big market. So you have to be alert in appreciating all this.
Yes.
And
there's a fourth element, Ambassador.
Yes.
Brotherly love.
Brotherly love, yeah. Love is a four-letter word which people sometimes forget because love is a fleeting thing to many people. Yeah. And their hope is always getting better than whatever they have in their hand. So it's dangerous, but I think many of the business examples that we have in ASEAN has basically fostered the growth of many small companies in our region. Look around. There are examples in Malaysia, examples all over the if you look at all these startups in Indonesia, never have people imagine the potential there. In Singapore, we are small food retailer that grows so big because they capitalize on the ASEAN market and then they make themselves relevant. The mistake that one make, if I may be bold enough to make this, Malaysian think that their Bahasa Malaysian language is appreciated by everybody in Indonesia. So when they set up the business in Indonesia, they just use the Bahasa Malaysia, which is different from Bahasa Indonesia.
That's right.
And when I was in ASEAN Secretariat for 5 years, my Indonesian staff will always say, "Alamak, this one, it's Bahasa Malaysia lah. Here we use Bahasa Indonesia, which consists of a lot of Javanese colloquial terms, Dutch terms, and Dutch and the British don't mix. Malaysia is a lot of British heritage, British background. So when I ask somebody and say, hey, you need to change your description of what is the ingredient inside this packaging, or in Bahasa Malaysia, I say, Bahasa Malaysia, same with Bahasa Indonesia. I said, no, if you go down to the market and survey, they'll tell you, you in Malaysia say Malaysia boleh. In Indonesia, they ask you visa. Everybody thought that you need a VISA.
And it means
visa for travel or visa card. But actually, that is the Indonesian word for boleh. So it is important to not to take any of these cultural differences for granted. And ask yourself, what is it that I need to do to make my customer in Indonesia feel comfortable with this Malaysian company which produce halal food, which can be consumed by the huge population of Indonesian Muslims. But they will tell you, the Indonesian Muslims say, this one comes from Malaysia. They don't even bother to change their ingredient description. Why bother to buy them? This is a very practical example, but I use this example because it has been mentioned to me many times.
That's true.
You people take us for granted in Indonesia. Singaporeans like to speak English or you speak Chinese in front of us. You don't want to learn about Bahasa Indonesia. And when I ask whether visa can or not, you thought that I'm talking about a visa card or have I had a visa chalk on my passport. So these are things that we picked up along the way. Okay, I think I said too much already. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. It was wonderful talking to you. Follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and our website to keep up to date with our upcoming shows. Voice of ASEAN thanks all of you today for your time, and we'll be uploading a recorded version of this dialogue in our portal for those who missed it. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Beatrice.
Thank you. See you soon.
Bye-bye all of you listening to me.